The stagecoach rattled violently as it hit another rut in the dusty road, jolting Nora Anderson awake from her fitful sleep. Her gloved hands clutched the worn leather bag on her lap, all she had left of her previous life in Boston. The year was 1875, and she was headed to Promise Creek, a small mining town in Colorado Territory, to marry a man she'd never met. "Not much farther now, miss," the driver called down. "We'll reach Silverton by nightfall. You'll have to catch the local coach to Promise Creek tomorrow." Nora nodded, though no one could see her. The enormity of what she'd done washed over her again. After her father's death had left her penniless and facing the workhouse, answering an advertisement for a mail-order bride had seemed her only option. Now, heading toward a stranger named Harold Billings who needed a sturdy wife of good character, she wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. The coach slowed as they approached a river crossing. Through the window, Nora could see riders approaching from the opposite direction. "Whoa there," the driver called, pulling the horses to a stop. 3 men on horseback approached the coach. The one in front wore a weathered brown hat pulled low over his eyes. His face was tanned and unshaven, but his eyes, when they met Nora's through the coach window, were startlingly blue. "Afternoon," he said, tipping his hat to Nora before addressing the driver. "River's running high at the main crossing. You'll want to take the North Ford if you're heading to Silverton." "Much obliged," the driver replied. "Any trouble up ahead?" "Nothing but the usual," the rider said. His gaze returned to Nora, and something in his expression softened. "You folks heading far?" Before Nora could respond, the driver answered for her. "Taking this young lady to Silverton. She's a mail-order bride bound for Promise Creek." The rider's expression changed slightly. "Promise Creek? That's a good 3 days' ride from Silverton." "I'm aware," Nora said, finding her voice. "I have arrangements for the journey." He nodded slowly. "Well, safe travels, miss." Then, with a final tip of his hat, he and his companions rode off. The coach continued its journey, and Nora found herself thinking about the stranger with the blue eyes. There had been something in his gaze, a directness, an honesty that had stirred something inside her. By nightfall, they reached Silverton, a bustling mining town nestled in the mountains. The driver helped Nora down from the coach and pointed her toward the Silver Dollar Hotel. "Rest up, miss. Coach for Promise Creek leaves at noon tomorrow." Nora thanked him and made her way to the hotel, aware of the stares her Eastern clothing attracted. The lobby was filled with miners, gamblers, and other rough-looking men who fell silent as she entered. "I need a room for the night," she told the clerk, a thin man with spectacles perched on his nose. "Traveling alone, miss?" he asked, eyebrows raised. "Yes, I'm continuing to Promise Creek tomorrow." A voice behind her made her turn. "Promise Creek, you say?" It was the rider from earlier, now standing in the doorway of the hotel. "Yes," Nora replied cautiously. "Why do you ask?" He approached, removing his hat. In the lamplight, she could see his features more clearly: strong jaw, straight nose, and those same intense blue eyes. "Name's Wade Yates," he said, extending a hand. "I run cattle about 30 miles east of here. Couldn't help overhearing you're heading to Promise Creek." Nora shook his hand briefly. "Nora Anderson." "Yes, I'm to catch the coach tomorrow." "Well, Miss Anderson, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but there won't be a coach to Promise Creek tomorrow or any day soon." He glanced at the clerk. "Tell her, Frank." The clerk nodded. "He's right, miss. Landslide took out the mountain pass 3 days ago. Won't be cleared for weeks, maybe longer." Nora felt the blood drain from her face. "But I must get to Promise Creek. I'm expected. A man is waiting for me." "Harold Billings?" Wade asked. "Yes. Do you know him?" A shadow passed over Wade's face. "Everyone knows Billings. Owns the largest silver mine in Promise Creek." "Then you understand why I must get there," Nora insisted. Wade studied her for a long moment. "There is another way around," he said finally. "Takes longer, about a week's ride. Through rough country." "I'll find a guide then," Nora said firmly. Wade shook his head. "No guide will take you now, not with winter coming on. Too dangerous." He hesitated, then added, "But I'm heading that direction myself." "I could take you." Nora stared at him, suspicious. "Why would you do that?" "Let's just say I have business in Promise Creek." His expression was unreadable. "Think about it overnight. I'll be here in the morning if you decide to accept my offer." With that, he replaced his hat and walked out, leaving Nora staring after him. That night, in her small hotel room, Nora considered her options. She'd promised to marry Harold Billings. He'd sent money for her passage. What would he think if she didn't arrive? But then again, what choice did she have? If the pass was blocked, she needed to find another way. Morning came too quickly. Nora dressed in her simplest traveling outfit and went downstairs to find Wade Yates sitting in the hotel dining room, drinking coffee. "I've decided to accept your offer," she said without preamble, sitting across from him. He nodded, unsurprised. "We'll need to get you proper riding clothes and supplies." "Can you ride?" "I grew up riding in Massachusetts," she replied. "Good. That'll make things easier." He studied her face. "You should know, Miss Anderson, this won't be an easy journey. We'll be camping most nights." "I understand. Do you?" His gaze was penetrating. "You're not in Boston anymore." "I'm well aware of that, Mr. Yates," she replied stiffly. "I may be from the East, but I'm not helpless." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Fair enough. Let's get you outfitted." The next few hours passed in a blur as Wade helped Nora purchase appropriate clothing, sturdy pants that scandalized her at first, boots, a warm coat, and a wide-brimmed hat. He also bought supplies, bedrolls, food, cooking equipment, and a rifle for her. "Can you shoot?" he asked as he handed her the weapon. "My father taught me," she said, checking the rifle with practiced hands that surprised him. By midday, they were ready to depart. Wade had bought Nora a gentle mare named Daisy, and his own horse, Thunder, was a powerful black stallion that seemed as untamed as the land itself. As they rode out of Silverton, Nora felt a mix of trepidation and excitement. She was placing her trust in a stranger, riding into the wilderness toward a future husband she'd never met. Yet somehow, with Wade Yates riding beside her, she felt oddly secure. They rode until sunset, covering ground quickly while the terrain was still relatively easy. Wade was mostly silent, pointing out landmarks occasionally or warning of difficult passages ahead. When they stopped to make camp by a small creek, Nora was surprised at how efficiently he worked, setting up a small fire and preparing a simple meal. "You've done this before," she observed as he handed her a plate of beans and bacon. "Most of my life," he replied, settling across from her. "Born in a wagon on the Oregon Trail. Never really settled anywhere for long." "And your family?" "Lost my ma to cholera when I was 10. Pa died in 68. Mining accident." He said it matter-of-factly, but Nora sensed the pain beneath his words. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I lost my father last year. It's what brought me west. No family left, no prospects in Boston." Wade nodded, understanding in his eyes. "And now you're to marry Harold Billings." Something in his tone made her defensive. "He offered me security, a home." "You've never met him." "No," she admitted. "But we've exchanged letters. He seems respectable." Wade poked at the fire with a stick. "Billings is the most powerful man in Promise Creek. Owns half the businesses, employs most of the men, including the sheriff." "You don't like him," Nora observed. "Let's just say we have history," Wade replied, his expression closing off. "Get some sleep, Miss Anderson. We have a long ride tomorrow." The next morning dawned clear and cold. Nora woke to find Wade already preparing coffee over a fresh fire. She'd slept surprisingly well, wrapped in her bedroll under the vast star-filled sky. "Sleep well?" Wade asked, handing her a tin cup of strong coffee. "Better than I expected," she admitted, warming her hands on the cup. "Though I'm a bit sore." "That'll ease up after a few days in the saddle," he said, offering her a slight smile. They ate a quick breakfast and set off again. The terrain gradually grew more challenging as they climbed into the foothills. Wade led them through narrow passes and across rushing streams, always seeming to know exactly which path to take. By midday, they had reached a high ridge. Wade reined in his horse and gestured for Nora to do the same. Before them stretched a breathtaking vista of mountains and valleys, the landscape painted in golds and reds of autumn. "It's beautiful," Nora breathed. "This is why I never could settle in a city," Wade said, his voice softer than she'd heard it before. "Nothing compares to this." For a moment, they sat in companionable silence, taking in the view. Then Wade pointed to a distant valley. "Promise Creek is over those mountains. That's where we're headed, but we need to swing north first, follow the river valley." As they continued their journey, Nora found herself growing more comfortable both with riding and with Wade's company. He wasn't a talkative man, but when he did speak, his words carried weight. He told her about the land, pointed out tracks of animals, showed her how to read the weather in the clouds. On the third night, as they made camp in a sheltered grove of aspens, Wade surprised her by asking about her life in Boston. "What did you do there?" he asked as they ate a dinner of rabbit he'd shot earlier. "I was a teacher," she replied, "at a small school for girls. I loved it, but after father died and left debts." She shrugged. "The school couldn't keep me on." "You're educated then," Wade observed. "Yes. Father believed women should be educated equally to men. He was considered quite radical." She smiled at the memory. "What about you? You seem well-spoken for someone who's lived his life on the trail." "My mother taught me to read. After she died, I kept it up. I've always carried books with me." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a worn copy of The Last of the Mohicans. Nora was touched by this unexpected revelation. "Would you read some?" she asked impulsively. Wade looked surprised, then slightly embarrassed. "I'm not much for reading aloud." "Please," she insisted gently. "It would be nice to hear something besides the wind and wolves." After a moment's hesitation, Wade opened the book and began to read. His voice, usually clipped and practical, took on a different quality, rich and expressive. Nora found herself captivated not just by the words, but by the man reading them. When he finally closed the book, the fire had burned low, and the night had grown deeper around them. "You read beautifully," Nora said softly. Wade looked up, their eyes meeting across the dying embers. Something passed between them, a recognition, a possibility before he broke the gaze. "We should sleep," he said, his voice slightly rough. "Long day tomorrow." The next day brought their first real challenge. Dark clouds had gathered overnight, and by mid-morning, rain began to fall, cold, driving rain that soon turned to sleet. "We need shelter," Wade called over the howling wind. "There's an old trapper's cabin about 2 miles ahead." They pushed on, the horses struggling against the wind. Nora was chilled to the bone despite her heavy coat. By the time the cabin came into view, a small, dilapidated structure nestled against a rocky outcropping, she was shivering uncontrollably. Wade helped her dismount and led her inside while he secured the horses in a lean-to attached to the cabin. The interior was dusty but dry, with a small stone fireplace and a rough wooden bed frame covered with an old straw mattress. "It's not much," Wade said as he returned, arms full of firewood, "but it'll keep us alive." He quickly built a fire, and as warmth slowly filled the tiny cabin, Nora began to thaw. Her clothes were soaked through, however, and Wade rummaged in his pack for a spare shirt. "You need to get out of those wet things," he said, handing her the shirt and turning his back. "I'll step outside for a moment." "You'll freeze," Nora protested. "Just turn around. I'll be quick." She changed as rapidly as possible, aware of Wade standing rigidly with his back to her. His shirt fell to her mid-thigh, and though it wasn't proper, it was warm and dry. "Finished," she said, spreading her wet clothes near the fire to dry. Wade turned, and something flickered in his eyes when he saw her in his shirt, her hair coming loose from its pins. He quickly looked away. "Storm might last all night," he said, moving to check the windows. "We'll stay here until it passes." As night fell, the storm intensified. Wind howled around the cabin, finding every crack and crevice. Despite the fire, the temperature dropped, and Nora found herself unable to stop shivering. Wade noticed. "Take the bed," he said. "I'll sleep by the fire." "The bed's big enough for both of us," Nora said practically, though her heart raced at her own boldness. "And we'll both freeze if we don't share warmth." Wade looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "That wouldn't be proper, Miss Anderson." "Neither is freezing to death," she countered. "We're both adults. And I trust you, Mr. Yates." Something in his face softened. "Wade," he said quietly, "if we're going to share a bed for warmth, you might as well call me Wade." "Nora," she offered in return. They arranged themselves awkwardly on the narrow bed, a blanket between them at first. But as the night grew colder and the wind fiercer, they gradually moved closer together, until Nora's back was pressed against Wade's chest, his arm draped protectively over her. "Still cold?" he murmured, his breath warm against her hair. "No," she whispered truthfully. Despite the storm raging outside, She felt safer than she had in years. When morning came, the storm had passed, leaving a world transformed by a thin layer of early snow. Nora awoke to find herself still in Wade's arms, his face peaceful in sleep. For a moment, she allowed herself to simply look at him, the strong lines of his face softened in repose, the dark lashes against his tanned skin. She carefully extricated herself and went to check on her clothes, which were now dry. When she turned back, Wade was awake, watching her with those intense blue eyes. "Morning," he said, his voice rough with sleep. "Morning," she replied, suddenly shy. "The storm's passed." He nodded, sitting up. "We should get moving. Lost a day already." They prepared to leave in companionable silence, but something had shifted between them. Wade's gaze lingered on her longer, and Nora found herself more aware of his presence, the sound of his voice, the way he moved. As they continued their journey, the landscape grew increasingly rugged. They followed a narrow river valley, the water rushing beside them, swollen from the recent storm. The going was slow, and they had to dismount often to lead the horses across difficult terrain. "How much further?" Nora asked on the 5th day, as they picked their way across a rocky slope. "We should reach Promise Creek in 2 more days," Wade replied, his expression carefully neutral. "Weather permitting." Nora nodded, trying to ignore the sinking feeling in her stomach. 2 more days, and she would meet Harold Billings, her future husband. 2 more days, and she would say goodbye to Wade Yates. That evening, they made camp in a protected hollow. As they ate their simple meal, Nora finally asked the question that had been bothering her. "What's your history with Harold Billings?" "You never did say." Wade was silent for so long that Nora thought he wouldn't answer. Then he sighed. "Billings and I were partners once. We found a silver strike together back in '70. Good friends, or so I thought." His jaw tightened. "Then one night, I was jumped by 3 men, beaten within an inch of my life. When I recovered, I found Billings had registered the claim in his name alone, told everyone I'd tried to cheat him, and run off." "That's terrible," Nora whispered, horrified. "Did you try to fight it?" Wade gave a bitter laugh. "With what? Billings had money, influence. I had broken ribs and a concussion. By the time I could stand, he'd already brought in investors and started the mine." He poked at the fire. "That mine is the reason Promise Creek exists. The reason Billings is rich and powerful. And that's why you're going back? For revenge." Wade looked up, meeting her eyes across the fire. "I had it all planned out. Then I met a woman on her way to marry the man who stole everything from me." Nora's heart pounded in her chest. "And now I don't know," he admitted quietly. "All I know is I've spent 5 years hating a man, and the last 5 days wondering if I'm falling for his bride." The confession hung in the air between them. Nora felt as though she couldn't breathe. "Wade," she began, not knowing what she wanted to say. He stood abruptly. "You should sleep. We have an early start tomorrow." The next day was tense, both of them careful to maintain distance. Wade was more taciturn than ever, and Nora was lost in her own thoughts. She had made a commitment to Harold Billings. He had paid for her journey west. She had given her word. Yet every time she looked at Wade, his straight back in the saddle, his capable hands on the reins, she felt a tug in her heart that had nothing to do with obligation and everything to do with the growing feelings she could no longer deny. By midday, they had reached a high pass. Below them spread a wide valley, and in the distance, nestled against the mountains, they could see the town of Promise Creek, a collection of wooden buildings clustered around what must be the mine. "There it is," Wade said, his voice tight. "Your destination." Nora stared at the town that was to be her home, feeling nothing but dread. "It's smaller than I expected. It's grown since I was last here," Wade replied. "Silver does that, brings people money." They made camp early that night, both aware that tomorrow would bring them to Promise Creek and the end of their journey together. After a nearly silent meal, Wade disappeared to check the horses, leaving Nora alone by the fire. When he returned, his face was set in determined lines. "I need to tell you something before we reach town," he said, sitting across from her. "What is it?" "Billings isn't the man he pretends to be in those letters. He's cruel, Nora. The way he treats the miners, the townspeople, anyone he sees as beneath him." Wade leaned forward. "I'm not just saying this because of our past. You need to know what you're walking into." Nora swallowed hard. What would you have me do, Wade? I gave my word. He paid for my passage. I'll pay him back, Wade said immediately. Every cent. And then what? Nora asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Where would I go? Wade hesitated, then stood and crossed to her side of the fire. He knelt beside her, taking her hands in his. Come with me, he said simply. I've got land, about 100 miles east of here. Good land. I was going to settle there after. After I dealt with Billings. We could build something, Nora. Together. Nora stared at him, her heart racing. You barely know me. I know enough, he replied, his eyes never leaving hers. I know you're brave and smart and stronger than you look. I know you love books and can shoot a rifle and don't complain even when you're bone-tired. I know I've never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. Wade, she breathed, unable to say more. He reached up to touch her cheek. I'll ride 1,000 miles for you, Nora Anderson. Just say the word. Instead of speaking, Nora leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was tentative at first, then deepened as Wade pulled her closer. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing heavily. Is that a yes? Wade asked, a smile tugging at his lips. It's a maybe, Nora replied, trying to think clearly despite the way her heart was pounding. Wade, I still need to meet Harold Billings. I need to tell him face to face that I can't marry him. I owe him that much. Wade's smile faded, but he nodded. I understand. But Nora, Billings won't let you go easily. He's not the type. I have to try, she insisted. We'll go to Promise Creek tomorrow as planned. I'll speak to him, explain that I've changed my mind, and offer to repay him for my passage. And if he refuses? Nora straightened her shoulders. Then we'll deal with that when it happens. The next morning, they rode toward Promise Creek in tense silence. As they approached the outskirts of town, Wade pulled his hat lower. I should stay back, he said. Billings will recognize me. No, Nora replied firmly. We do this together. The town was busy, miners and townspeople going about their business. Several people stopped to stare at the newcomers. Wade led them directly to a large building with a sign reading Billings Mining Company. As they dismounted, a well-dressed man emerged from the building. He was in his 50s, with silver hair and cold eyes that widened in shock when he saw Wade. Yates, he said, his hand moving toward his waistband where Nora presumed he carried a gun. You've got nerve showing your face here. Hello, Billings, Wade replied, his voice steady. I believe you're expecting Miss Anderson. Harold Billings turned his attention to Nora, his expression changing to one of calculated charm. Miss Anderson, welcome to Promise Creek. I see you've had an interesting journey. His eyes flicked to Wade. Though I'm surprised at your choice of companion. Mr. Billings, Nora began. I need to speak with you privately. Of course, Billings replied smoothly. Though I think I can guess what this is about. He glared at Wade. You always were a thief, Yates. First my mine, now my bride. You're the thief, Billings, Wade retorted, stepping closer. We both know what really happened. Billings laughed, a cold sound. Is that what he told you, Miss Anderson? That I stole from him? Yates was always good at spinning tales. I know enough to make my own decisions, Nora replied firmly. And I've decided I cannot marry you, Mr. Billings. I'll repay you for my passage, of course. Billings' face hardened. You signed a contract, Miss Anderson. I paid not just for your passage, but for your commitment. You don't get to change your mind because some saddle tramp turned your head. She said no. Billings, Wade said, stepping between them. That's the end of it. Is it? Billings snapped his fingers, and two burly men appeared from the building behind him. Take Yates. He's trespassing on my property. The men moved forward, but Wade was faster. He drew his revolver, stopping them in their tracks. Don't, he warned. We're leaving. Both of us. Billings' face contorted with rage. You think you can just ride in here and take what's mine? Again, he pulled his own gun. I should have made sure you were dead 5 years ago. Several townspeople had gathered, watching the confrontation unfold. Among them, Nora noticed a man wearing a sheriff's badge, who seemed hesitant to intervene. Put the gun down, Billings, Wade said calmly. There are too many witnesses this time. Witnesses? Billings laughed. These people work for me. They know what's good for them. An older man stepped forward from the crowd. Not all of us, Harold. He looked at Wade. Some of us remember how it really was. How you cheated this man and left him for dead. Murmurs spread through the growing crowd. The sheriff finally moved forward. Mr. Billings, I think it's best if— Shut up, Porter, Billings snapped. Remember who pays your salary. The sheriff looked uncomfortable, but stepped back. Nora moved to stand beside Wade. I'm not property to be claimed, Mr. Billings. I made a mistake agreeing to marry a man I'd never met. I won't compound that error by going through with it. Billings' gun wavered between Wade and Nora. You'll regret this, both of you. The only thing I regret, Wade replied, is not coming back sooner to show these people what kind of man you really are. For a tense moment, Nora thought Billings might actually shoot. Then, slowly, the older man who had spoken up moved to stand beside Wade and Nora. Then another person joined them, and another. Billings looked around at the faces of the townspeople, no longer intimidated, but resolute. His hand trembled slightly. You're making a mistake, he said, but his voice had lost its edge. No, Nora replied firmly. For the first time in a long while, I'm doing exactly what I should. She took Wade's free hand in hers, a public declaration of her choice. Billings looked at their joined hands, then at the crowd surrounding them. Slowly, he lowered his gun. Get out of my town, he said quietly. Both of you. Gladly, Wade replied, keeping his own gun ready as he backed toward the horses, pulling Nora with him. They mounted quickly, the townspeople creating a barrier between them and Billings. As they rode out of Promise Creek, Nora felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. Where to now? She asked when they were safely away from the town. Wade turned to her, a slow smile spreading across his face. I told you about my land. It's good country, Nora. Room to build a home, raise cattle. He paused. Maybe a family someday, if you want it. Is that a proposal, Wade Yates? I reckon it is, he replied, his eyes bright with promise. What do you say? Will you marry a broken-down cowboy instead of a rich mine owner? Nora smiled, feeling truly free for the first time. I'd ride 1,000 miles for you too, Wade. 3 years later, Nora stood on the porch of their ranch house, watching Wade return from checking the cattle. Their home wasn't grand, but it was theirs, built with their own hands on the land Wade had claimed years before. The Promise Y Ranch, they called it for the brand Wade had designed, but also for the promise they'd made to each other that day riding away from Promise Creek. As Wade dismounted and swept their 1-year-old daughter into his arms, Nora placed a hand on her swelling belly, where their second child grew. The journey that had brought her west as a mail-order bride had taken an unexpected turn, but had led her exactly where she was meant to be. Wade climbed the porch steps, kissing her gently. Everything all right? Perfect, she replied, leaning into his embrace. Just perfect. Behind them, the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant golds and reds. Before them stretched a future they would build together one day at a time, one promise kept after another.